Good morning. I'm so excited that this room is incredibly full and that you're here in the morning and that you got to campus through the gates. Thank you very much. My name is Amy Braden, and I'm the Director of Programs for the Humanities and Digital World program here at USC. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Immersive Technologies and Cultural Heritage Committee. This is the second iteration of this symposium. And we've had great applications. We were very selective in accepting applications. So we really want to welcome the presenters and anyone who's in the audience as well. I'm going to start by telling you just a little bit about Humanities in a Digital World, which is one of the co-sponsors of this program. The other co-sponsor is the Amundsen Lab, which the director is Curtis Fletcher, and he's going to talk in a minute too. First of all, Humanities in the Digital World, I'm the director of programs, but our PI on that Mellon grant is Peter Mancall, and I want to start by thanking him for his enduring support, his amazing endurance to be able to seek after funding and to be able to respond to sort of new and creative ideas. So thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to give a couple other things too. I also want to start off by thanking the other committee members. This committee has been wonderful. It's one of those groups where even when it's a Zoom meeting, I'm really excited to go to the Zoom meetings. That seems like such a weird statement, but I want to actually thank them. So Curtis Fletcher, who is the director of the Amundsen Lab, Mats Borges, who is the project coordinator with lots of other titles for the Amundsen Lab, and Sean Fraga, who is assistant professor at USC of Environmental Studies and History, and our former postdoc for Humanities in the Digital World, and Lauren Dodds, who is our current postdoc researcher for Humanities in the Digital World. So thank you to this team. You guys are amazing. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program. We started off as the Digital Humanities program, which was funded by the Mellon Foundation in 2013. And the idea was to be able to expose fellows to digital techniques. So one of the first things that we did with that program is we had a best practices workshop where we took other Mellon-funded programs together, and we all had a symposium like this. And we were really distinct because other programs funded specific projects. But we decided that we were going to fund individuals who had really strong humanities scholarship, and we were either going to support their interest in digital humanities or we were just going to expose them to digital humanities. And we've been really successful with that model. It's different. It has unique outcomes, but we have funded 23 PhD fellows, one of whom is here. Anne, where are you? Right, so Anne Turan is here, and she's our current PhD fellow who's going to be one of the commentators later today. And then we had 13 postdocs, one of whom was Sean, who then stayed on at USC, and we are so happy to have that. So then we got a second iteration of the grant, and Mellon asked us not to continue the theme of digital humanities exactly, as though digital humanities was something separate from all other humanities. And so with Mellon's urging and our own sort of creativity, we thought we're going to make it humanities in a digital world, with this idea that all humanities has digital components, and we want to sort of also make the digital, imbued with humanities. So that's where our program is, and this is at the end of our grant right now, which ends this year. This is the end of the second iteration, and this is our last best practices program under this grant. So I've asked our committee members to talk today about what our goals are for the symposia. And so I'm going to start. So I have two goals. The first one is I really want us to be able to continue conversations. I really like that this is the second annual that we started conversations. We have many people who were here last time who are now even more a part of the programming, and to make it so that this is something where we're sort of building a community that's not just what's in this room today, but that can expand beyond USC and then beyond this exact year as well. Okay, second goal, which kind of links to that one, because I want to express a goal that I expressed last year. Just continue that conversation. And that is that I want us to approach the projects that we're going to hear about today through what I think is a really traditional humanities lens, something that humanities scholars, those of us in literature, theater studies, art history really do a lot, which is close reading, right? Something that's really unique, I think, to the humanities, the way that we look at that. And by close reading, what I mean is that when you look at traditionally a text, and you look at the text and you consider the relationship between form and content. And that's how I want us to think about the projects today. And I'm hoping that our conversations can embrace that idea. So, and by that, if we're looking at something like a poem, we would look at, what's the meaning that the words are making, right? The content, what's that sort of idea, content, research, knowledge that's being communicated. But then we're also going to look at the form, right? So in poetry, it's like the form of the words. What words are used? What rhymes? What's a sonnet, right? That the form contributes to creating the meaning as much as the words themselves. And I think that really rings true from when we think about digital humanities projects, because they're embracing what are still relatively new forms, and really so that we can embrace the idea of what is the new meaning that is created because of the form, and how does the form and the content really mix together, and that those can't be separated. So those are my two goals. Next, we're going to have Curtis Fletcher. You ready to talk about your goals?
Do I really have to?
Yes!
I didn't think I actually had to. I know you emailed about it, but okay, I got one. Okay. Well, okay. So first, let me say I'm Chris Fletcher, the director of the Amundsen Lab, which is the space where you're at. The Amundsen Lab is a innovation lab here at USC Libraries, but also a hub for much digital humanities work that goes on at USC. We do a fair amount of, XR work, like we'll be seeing here. Like maybe some of you have heard about the Bunker Hill Reframe project, where we're trying to recreate 18 contiguous blocks of Bunker Hill from the 1940s in downtown Los Angeles, and annotate that with a lot of oral histories and other artifacts. We're also the developer and maintainer of Scalar, which is an authoring and publishing platform that is sort of widely adopted in the digital humanities. So we do a fair amount of work with that too. So welcome to the Amundsen Lab and to the USC Libraries. My goal, okay, here's my goal. And maybe it's a lofty one. My goal for this symposium this year, last year, and hopefully into the future, I think, is to sort of showcase, highlight, make known the use of immersive tech in the humanities and the digital humanities in particular. And what I mean by that is this. In the digital humanities, in academia and the digital humanities, I think in particular, there's often a lot of focus on sort of data-intensive projects, right? And now with generative AI, it's pretty much only data-intensive projects. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is because it's data-intensive projects are sort of a strong man for the digital humanities, for people who want to advocate for the digital humanities. Look, we're using big data now. We can quantitatively say these things about human culture that we couldn't before. And then on the other hand, it's actually also a straw man for a lot of people who want to critique the digital humanities. This isn't what we do as humanists, right? This doesn't fit, it doesn't dovetail properly with a sort of traditional inquiry or methods of the humanities. And so the sort of immersive part, the immersive technology part of the digital humanities tends to get a little elided because it's not part of that attention or part of that debate, and it doesn't get as much notice. But I think that there are ways in which the use of immersive technologies in the humanities is in some ways most suitable for when it comes to the use of technology in the humanities. Because it's what we do. We immerse our readers or viewers or players or whatever you want to call them now in a kind of argument-driven narrative exposing artifacts along the way, right? This is what we've always done. And there's something about immersive technology that is incredibly amenable to that in a way that data-intensive stuff isn't always, right? So I've been harping for a while on this, not necessarily distinction, well, not division, but a distinction between kind of data-intensive digital humanities and more immersive stuff. And I think that this symposium is a great way to sort of make that known and showcase that and show that there is this other almost pillar to the digital humanities that people should take notice of. I guess that's my goal. Okay, logistics. We're a full house, so if there's a fire or any other kind of emergency, there's 4 ways to get out, but this is a dead end. So fire exit that way, and then the main lobby that way. So if there's any emergency, don't go to my office. Don't go this way. You're not going to be safe in my office. So that way, and that way. Bathrooms? Bathrooms are right back through those glass doors. Anything else? If you have any questions about the space, I'm Curtis. There's Matt's is right there. If you need anything, phone charger, any questions about the space, let us know. Yeah? Off to Matt's.
So hi, everybody. It's really nice to see a lot of you again and to hear what you've been up to over the last year. I'm happy to see so many new faces too. So for everybody, welcome and welcome back. In the last year, I've seen our field, Immersive Cultural Heritage or Immersive Digital Humanities, whichever is the more ostentatious option for you. I've seen it mature considerably. Way too often in the past, I'd see immersive academic projects made without the most basic considerations for user interface design or design for accessibility. Projects using game development technologies that really could have benefited enormously from reading the first page of a game design textbook. Projects that wrestled with gimmicky new technologies to the dubious benefit of anyone involved. And sometimes I still see projects like this. More and more often, however, I've seen projects with a really strong sense of academic rigor and intellectual integrity. Projects that lift the immersive humanities up to an uncompromising level of scholarship in themselves. And I'm happy to count the projects that we've brought here for ITCH 2024 among those. But they're not off the hook. Part of our consideration in selecting our projects and our session leaders was to bring this interdisciplinary sense of critical thinking, not just on the technology, but also on the design, the ethics, and the scholarship involved in the whole venture, right? In that spirit, I welcome everyone to take a critical, collegiate, but critical, considerate, kind even, but constructively critical posture in our approach over the next couple of days. I'm really looking forward to seeing these projects. So to speed that along, I'm just going to pass it off to Lauren.
My goals for this are, I think, brief, but one of them would be, I was really struck when we looked at applications this year compared to last year by how much collaborative work we see. And that's true last year too. Digital humanities requires kind of a team of experts in different areas. But this year, I think every panel has at least 2 presenters and some have 3. So I think we can all learn a lot from you, from each other, about how people in the humanities can do more collaborative work. And I'm excited about that. My second goal would be just to look at, this is such a rich set of projects, and I think there's so many possibilities for sharing our work with the public as humanists in the public humanities and also creating new opportunities in our teaching. So I'm excited to learn from you.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Sean Fraga, and it's really a joy to see these projects that we have known only as names and hyperlinks instantiated in the flesh, all of you here as physical people. I want to start by radically oversimplifying the digital humanities. Most of what we do in DH is taking cultural heritage materials and making them more legible to computers. And we do this through text encoding, we do this through georeferencing, and the goal is to make these materials into something that a computer can process and spit back some sort of interesting result. And immersive technologies demand something different. Instead, we are using computers and using technology to make these cultural heritage materials more legible to people, but legible in a different format or accessible through a different means. And in that difference, the technology remains essential. It remains the structure, the form, the means by which we access. But the humanistic content, the making that technology into a space for humanistic inquiry, that is where I find the most excitement about all of these projects. How the technology and the humanities content, the cultural heritage content dance together. I'm going to talk more I'll talk more right now about how that informed our method of organizing and scheduling this conference. All of you are here with at least one other person involved in your project because we wanted to be able to have people leading these projects speak both to the technologies involved, the decisions that they've made in choosing and implementing and developing technologies, and also to the humanistic questions, what these projects are designed to inquire about or reveal about the world. And the best way to do that is by bringing both sides of that conversation into the room. And we've carried that out as well in the session leaders that we've chosen. So in addition to each session having at least 2 presenters, each session has at least 2 questioners or commenters, one speaking primarily from the humanities and one speaking primarily from the technology side. We expect that there will be a lot of overlap between these 2 sides, both among the presenters and among the questioners. That's part of the magic of doing some of this work. One of my goals for the conversation then in this symposium is to bring more humanists into these conversations, to show the value of these technologies to people who might not think of augmented reality or virtual reality or 3D modeling or any of these as being relevant to their research or to their classroom practice. And if you're coming from the humanities, I hope you leave these next 2 days at least with a new sense of possibility and maybe excitement about what these technologies can do for you. And similarly, bringing technologists and developers into the conversation, I think the humanities offer a lot of really interesting and potentially productive ways of mobilizing existing technologies. I hire student workers for technology projects here at USC for DH projects, and I get the sense that they're really eager to work on something beyond the template projects that they encounter in their computer science classes. So the goal is both to bring everyone into conversation and also to continue the conversation. As part of that, we're going to ask you to fill out some surveys about your experiences here at the symposium today and tomorrow. And we're doing that because we are planning on applying for 2 different NEH programs in the near future. Having your feedback and your sense of what worked well for you about this symposium will help us represent to NEH the strongest parts of this organization and tell us what to carry forward into future iterations of this. Okay, so in the theme, the tradition of starting off this multidisciplinary conversation between humanists and technologists, I want to introduce the 2 session leaders for our first session. And they will then introduce the presenters. Our session leaders are Bryan Kraemer. Here you are. Bryan Kraemer is an Egyptologist and educator at the Robert and Frances Fullerton Museum of Art at California State University, San Bernardino, and co-director of the Wadi El Hudi expedition. And Wendy Fok, is she here? She may be on her way. Wendy is an adjunct associate professor at the USC School of Architecture. They trained as an architect and are interested in design, technology, and creative solutions for the built environment. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Bryan to introduce the 2 presenters of our first session. Bryan.
Well, thank you all for having me back. This was a great conference last year, and I'm very thrilled to get both days in today, this time. And especially for this project, which I've seen previous iterations for at Egyptology conferences, but I'm much curious about next slide as well. So, Rita Lucarelli is the Associate Professor of Egyptology at the Department of Middle East Languages and Cultures, the Faculty Curator of Egyptology at the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology, and a Fellow of the Digital Humanities at the University of California, Berkeley. And Elaine Sullivan is an Associate Professor of Egyptology in the History Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I won't fault them for both being UC, but they both are. She is a digital humanist whose first book, Constructing the Sacred, was born digital in 2020. Look at it online. See a lot more about this topic, and it's an amazing digital humanities project. So, Rita and Elaine, will you tell us more about this project?
Yeah, thank you to the organizers of this amazing symposium. We are sure we're going to learn a lot, and indeed we were selfishly thinking to use this platform to get as much feedback as possible for this project, because it's really still in the making, and we are encountering many challenges. Because what we wanted to do was indeed try to use immersive technology, virtual reality, to digitally repatriate a sarcophagus that you see here flipping around in 3D, but in fact, so repatriate it to Egypt in its original tomb. And with the 3D model, it's really easy to flip it around, but this is a 2 tons heavy basalt sarcophagus lid, which was originally in a 30 meters deep tomb, shaft tomb, in Saqqara, the necropolis, one of the necropolis of ancient Egypt, near Cairo, and belonged to an official and high official named Psamtek, was rediscovered in 1900, and that's when the son of Phoebe Hearst purchased it and brought it by ship to Berkeley. Where is it now? It's been for a long time in a storage facility of campus. Thanks to a crowdfunding campaign, we were able to bring it back to the gallery space. And this is now in view in Berkeley, but completely decontextualized. And so as in my work also as faculty curator at the Hearst Museum, I wondered if there was a way to use emerging digital technologies to better express to the museum visitors and to my students, because the Hearst Museum is the Anthropology Museum of UC Berkeley, all the aspects of the sarcophagus religious setting, archaeological setting. And so I started first with digitizing the sarcophagus and building okay, this is, this they come later. But building, anyway, a 3D model, annotated 3D model, that then we used for this project, Return to the Tomb. So in order to virtually replace the sarcophagus in its original context, I joined with Elaine to form a collaborative team of faculty, technologists, librarians, students from the Universities of California, Berkeley and Santa Cruz. We have recently added 2 other co-directors, Emmanuel Geweli from Virginia Tech and Matthias Lang from the University of Bonn, who are not with us today. But what we try to do is to develop a dynamic VR headset experience that combines a 3D reconstruction landscape model of Saqqara with a photogrammetric model of the sarcophagus. And so this application should allow the user to jump from first looking at the landscape, at the necropolis, to the tomb, and then to the sarcophagus. And once the viewer is in front of the sarcophagus, even clicking on that and reading the text, what the text say. Generally, these sarcophagi were decorated with magical spells for the protection of the deceased in the other world. So they say a lot about beliefs in the netherworld of the ancient Egyptians. And also for students and Egyptologists tell us a lot about how those ancient texts were transmitted from the time of the pyramids, 3rd millennium BC, until the 1st millennium BC, second half of the first millennium BC, when Psamtek was preparing his tomb. By the way, we didn't find the body, the mummified body. The sarcophagus was empty, so we think maybe Psamtek died in a battle outside Egypt, since his titles say that he was also a chief of the Libyans, so those mercenary soldiers that were fighting for Egypt. But I'll give the word here to...
So the project also hopes to counteract what we see as disrespectful narratives about ancient Egypt that proliferate in online gaming, including VR headset experiences. And unfortunately, despite its, Despite its incredible legacy, many depictions online of ancient Egypt in modern media are sensationalized and ahistorical and completely ignore the importance of Egypt's place in global cultural heritage. Many of the games that we found online portray exoticized tropes of Orientalism, like walking decayed mummies, or Egypt as a desert-themed playground for Westerners, including this one called Roller Coaster Egypt VR. Egypt was one of the first state societies on Earth, one of the first cultures to invent writing, maintained a complex bureaucracy, and created a unique religious system that endured for centuries. And these important aspects of its history are often overlooked in popular online media. And because we're especially wary of the history of portraying Egypt as a place for treasure hunting, our VR app is not a gamification of Egypt, but instead a chance to meaningfully express important cultural concepts to the public as an educational tour. And indeed, there's also the very few things on VR that are about Egypt right now really focus on Egypt of the pharaohs, so focusing on kings and queens. And our project focuses on a non-royal individual living and preparing his burial in Egypt in the Egyptian late period, the 7th to 6th century BCE, a time when the country was open to foreign influences and pharaonic culture was actually struggling to maintain its religious and artistic traditions. So Psamtek's tomb is representative of this period, and it's an interesting time, and so we think it offers a sort of unique view into this moment.
Okay, so starting from the sarcophagus lid, actually, that was actually also my first case study for another project connected to this one, the Book of the Dead in 3D project. I like the catchy title, same as The Return to the Tomb, really perfect for Halloween, not yet. But and this is a project I've been leading since 2015 together with a group of students, and it is about annotating 3D models, but especially making sure that the decoration, the textual decorations of those coffins can be understood directly through the 3D models, so without having to look for the book publications, although I'm still really positive about publishing these items traditionally, but I think the digital publication is really great complement and much more accessible for students, definitely. So I'm using this project also for my language courses of ancient Egyptian. And I'm especially interested to indeed highlight the textualization of this kind of artifacts, since coffins and sarcophagus lids produced in the first millennium BC were really media of what the Egyptians called we call Egyptian magic, they called the Heka, which was a sort of this creative force. It's a very interesting conception that this text explains. And so this is just to give you an example of the kind of text that we find on this sarcophagi, in particular on the one of Psamtek. It was protection of Psamtek, invocations to the gods. And these texts have never been published. I'm now publishing the sarcophagus lid, but this has been for many years, decades, in the museum, in the Hearst Museum, without being published, and also not exhibited because it was in a storage room. So I'm trying with this project also to compensate this long time that Psamtek has been kind of hidden to the public. And okay, maybe this is.
Sure. So we are also asked to speak a little bit about the technology behind the project. So I'm just going to briefly say that each different section of the project uses different technology. The landscape model is based on a 3D GIS map of Saqqara that I created for my 2020 monograph. And I used the Esri City Engine Urban Simulation Program combined with also custom modeling of about 75 of the individual structures based on archaeological plans and publications from over 150 years of Egyptology. The tomb model itself is new and unfortunately will not be visible in the video demo today or those of you that watched our videos in advance. But our colleague Matthias Lang, as part of the larger Saqqara C8 Tombs project, recently scanned Psamtek's and the neighboring tombs in the field, and you can see some of his rich imagery here in the center and to the right. And we're excited to add that new content to the model. And this utilized like a laser scanner in order to document the full extent of the shafts below ground. And then the individual tombs were recorded with photogrammetry and processed with Metashape, all these things that you all have done. And Matthias has published a very detailed article on the process, and I have the citation for that at the end. So if anyone's interested in more details.
Yeah, well, these are just photos of our first visit in the tomb, but this is not one of the tombs open to tourists because also for a question of safety, one needs to go down this 30 meters shaft. And as you can see, the burial chamber is really narrow and low. These are our colleagues, Matthias Lang and Susanne Beck from the University of Tübingen, who are currently also conducting an epigraphic mission to the old necropolis. But this is just to give you an idea of this tomb, of the beauty of those hieroglyphs. Even the tomb walls are covered with hieroglyphs, and we are now in the process of adding the texture of the tomb walls. As you can see, we are sitting here, we are not ruining the hieroglyphs. We are really making sure we don't sit on the hieroglyphs, but that was actually the stone outer lid of the outer sarcophagus. So the Egyptians really were obsessed with protecting the mummified body, and they used this system of sort of Russian dolls, like one coffin on the other to make sure that the body will be protected. So we are here at the outer coffin, outer sarcophagus. But yeah, the time is really running out. Challenges of this project. We've been applying for a few grants for technical development. This is what we need right now. We've not been very successful after a first generous funding of the C3 and Banatao Institute of University of California in Berkeley. And we are trying to understand how to make this project more attractive for granting agencies. So tips, advice are welcome. We deal a lot with accessibility, and so especially using this VR technology, and this is also what we really would like to discuss here, is not an experience that everyone enjoy. And so how to deal with that, when this technology, I think, is already becoming a bit obsolete. How to preserve the data, how to make it accessible even without the old headset. And again, accessibilities of the objects of the tomb we are populating. Many of these objects, it's not just the sarcophagus, there was a funerary equipment, some statuettes, there was even a subsidiary room with another coffin and the mummified body. All that is scattered around in museums. Elaine actually spent yesterday in the Getty archive looking for statuettes because some are even in California. And it sometimes is really difficult to find and reconstruct these environments. And so the question is, what do? You don't want to do a video game and just to start to add stuff that wasn't there, but what if it's an empty experience? Like you enter in the tomb and there's nothing. That's also not really super enjoyable. Also, another challenge is pedagogy.
Yeah, just so the individuality of VR headset experiences. How do we think about this technology as a teaching tool when VR headsets are isolating and they're really made for one person at a time? Rita and I both teach at a UC, and most of our classes, mine are 60 students, sometimes 120. So how do I assign all of those students to do these experiences? How can we scale that up? What are some alternatives? Also, Rita is a curator at the Hearst Museum, so how can she integrate those kinds of experiences within a museum setting? As many recent publications on digital interaction in museum spaces have documented, museums are usually a group experience. So how do we find a way for groups to experience environments in a collaborative way and make VR more integrated with this sort of group moment?
Yeah, and I designed a new course at UC Berkeley, Digital Humanities and Egyptology, and thanks to the support of Digital Humanities Berkeley and the Center of Research, Teaching and Learning, I could supply Oculus headsets for all the students, and we create virtual classrooms on this platform called Spatial I/O. I don't know if anyone used it. And inside this classroom, we create gallery walks. Here you see one of my student projects on 3D copies, fakes, and so on. It was very successful, but still, I had some students who just could not enjoy the experience, could not have the headset for more than 10 minutes on. So this is still for me an open question. I love virtual reality experiences, but I realize that in the classroom setting, still there are a lot of challenges and issues to be solved.
Another challenge we're facing with this project is how to be clear about the object's modern history as an antiquity. As Rita mentioned, the sarcophagus was removed from Egypt in 1903 during a period of British colonial rule over Egypt. The Antiquity Service at the time was run by a series of French nationals, and they were the ones that excavated the tomb. Egypt has, since the 1830s, enacted a series of antiquities laws to limit the export of cultural objects. And in 1983, the Egyptian government created a law that says every object excavated in Egypt stays in Egypt. And we want to acknowledge this history in our application and emphasize the right that Egypt has to control its own material heritage. We don't want to make the modern history of the object the focus of the project, as our goal is to communicate about ancient Egypt. So one of the challenges is then strategies for balancing the histories of archaeology and colonialism in a public-facing project with that of the ancient world. Second, part of the legacy of the colonial period in Egypt is that much of the produced archaeological knowledge is in English, French, and German. So we purposefully want to create a tour that's not just in English, but also in Egyptian dialect Arabic. So we're being, so that we can be more inclusive of the Egyptian diaspora population here and potentially students in Egypt as well. And our co-collaborator, Imana Gweli, who recently came to Virginia Tech and is a specialist in 3D for architectural heritage, is going to voice the Egyptian narrative as well. So we're trying to think about how do we balance all of these different aspects to the project.
Yeah, and I think that's all. You can see some of our publications. We actually published a lot about this project on the Book of the Dead in 3D project myself. And in general, I've been really thinking a lot about the question of originals versus copies as 3D copies, virtual reality visualizations. And so what is the way to really ethically deal with these copies that become, I think, new media in themselves. So I really distinguish the original from the copy, and this it becomes almost a philosophical sort of reflection what we do with this immersive reality projects. Here are the credits, and I think we are happy
Thank
to
you.
take any question. or
Yeah.
discussion.
Hi. Do we have to
Sorry, this is
reintroduce-
Wendy, who's the,
Yeah.
who's the other discussant. We just got here.
Yeah. Well, I saw your whole entire presentation, but I'm coming from the architecture department, so we're not usually in this part of campus, so to speak. So yeah.
Do you want me to go first?
I mean, like, I think it's a great presentation, and a lot of the work overlaps, at least personally, a lot of work that I'm doing in actually a thesis studio that we're supposed to be teaching today. So I'm actually here for. So I think, should I just jump in for the first question?
Sure,
I guess, okay, so one of the biggest things I think, as someone also works quite closely with digital assets, is that there is a difficulty of accessing historical sites, which you've shown here. Also, did the team collaborate with various archaeologists, historians to both fact check and like pair up what you found and also kind of work on the 2D and 3D and also research? And how did that relationship
Yeah.
work?
So Rita and I are both Egyptologists. So Rita's been doing the translation of the texts themselves. She's an expert on funerary texts. So we're using her expertise. I do very different things than she does, and so we're trying to collaborate using sort of both of our skill sets. And yes, we've been collaborating with the Saqqara Sayai Tombs Project to get new information. They've been excavating the tombs. They've been re-excavating them now. So they were excavated early in the 1900s, but the recording was very schematic. I'll say that, schematic. And so we're getting new information from them as they're doing re-excavation now, which is going to help us understand the tomb better at the same time. So we're drawing on the expertise of as many people as we possibly can. We've talked to some other scholars that work on shabtis and other types of objects that are going to help us so that we can really provide interesting information in the educational tour on the different types of objects that are going to be in the tomb as well. So Rita and I are both very used to collaborating with others and drawing on their expertise whenever we can.
Yeah, if I may add to that, the problem is though very often, luckily, you find colleagues who are really happy to share the results of their research or excavations with us so that we can add to the digital reconstructions, but not always. Or they are very slow to do that. And so when that's the case, it's also a problem because then you miss some important pieces, and what they say is, well, you have to wait that I publish it. And sometimes, as you know, humanists are really careful publishers, so it takes years. And in the meantime, you're stuck. So I think it would be really important to raise the awareness in our fields, how important for shareability and accessibility are those projects, so that even those scholars who don't work into digital humanities are willing, almost should be required, to share their photos or of the tombs and things like that. I think that will be important. It's still not happening so much, at least in our field.
Okay. Are you guys ready for another? And we have till 10:30, right? That's, we have to shut this down? Correct? Okay. 10 minutes. Okay, I think you can cover it. You actually covered some of the initial question. I gave you a tip off on the publication issue, what's being published on this recently. And let me just tell you a little story. I had to try and find out where the data is coming from because I have not followed your publications extensively. And I just want to know where are you reconstructing it from? I went back to the ASAE article from 1901. And it's actually a pretty good one for 1901. They didn't always publish everything, but it actually has schematic plans of the tomb, and it looks like what you'd imagine this type of tomb would look like. Doesn't mean that it did look like that, but it worked. My question is, when you address the old publications or the modern publications, how will you help the user understand what's real, that's been verified and documented, versus what you're reconstructing? Because very often we're kind of tempted to push it to all look as real as possible. Yeah, and I like the fact that you guys have the textures in the most recent version, the material textures. That was something that I was going to ask about.
Yeah, so that's always an interesting question for those of us working in 3D, right? Especially if you do reconstructions like I do, which is, everything is a reconstruction usually, and even the ground is a reconstruction in my model. So one of the things that we would like to do in the final app is actually have the ability for the virtual visitor to turn things on and off, that it sort of highlights the fact that these things are reconstructions to sort of really bring into the fact to the visitor that this is not there today, right? Many people may have never been to Saqqara, right? If you're in the US, maybe you've never visited Egypt. So we'd love to have like a photogrammetric model of the tombs as they are today, and then the reconstruction version. So you can see today, and then what we imagine this looked like in the past, right? I don't love to get into those things where you're just like 3 layers of colors or things, this is red and this is green. I think that's asking a lot of your viewer to try to parse between all of these different things going on. So we are gonna try to more use text and audio to explain what people are seeing, and that these are reconstructions and that they're based on scholarly hypothesis. And that's part of the great thing of the VR headset experience, is that you can use audio so much and really be explaining things to people as they're looking, and that they don't have to necessarily read it. So that's always a challenge when we talk with students and show these really fancy 3D models. It's like, oh, this is what it looked like in ancient Egypt, and of course it's not. But I think we have to try to express that and to do some things to sort of to make it clear that this is this is a reconstruction by switching things on and off, and that's kind of maybe the best way of signaling that to our viewer.
Yeah, and also it's been very inspiring for me.
Okay.
Yeah, not just digital archaeologist Maurizio Forte from Duke University, who wrote about indeed digital reconstruction, VR reconstructions, and he talked about potential past versus real past. And indeed, what we're trying to do is reconstructing a potential past, and we have to make that clear, of course, to the user, and not the real past. But the real past, I think you cannot reconstruct it, not even just with a book, without visualizations. It's always what potentially was there, or how things develop.
So should we allow questions from the audience? No, sorry. We'd be happy to do. I think we have.
Sorry, you just don't have to. I don't have to ask a question for you.
I don't know what like the formalities are. Are we gonna ping pong?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, we can do. Okay. This is actually quite interesting. I mean, my world is quite different. But right now, to just give you a little bit of context, so I'm a trained architect, but a lot of the work that our practice does, in addition to what I'm researching here at USC, we did a point cloud scan of one of the projects we're working on is the New York Hall of Science. So we point cloud scanned the entire building to get the as-builts, and a lot of it is going to be translated into actual architectural drawings so that we could, again, show what's existing, what the issues are, always roof issues in every institutional building, and tell the client like what could be informed. But I think one of the more exciting aspects is like my previous life, I worked with the American Classical Studies in Greece, and we documented the Agora. So one of the kind of larger questions is database, right? So I think like it kind of parlays into the question is when you're collecting the diverse type of databases and team reviews and all this other stuff, like how was it like setting up the digital twin of the actual models? It kind of goes into Bryan's question, but I think more explicitly, what were the challenges that were when you were building out this digital twin?
You want to start,
for me in particular, and also for this students team that I built at UC Berkeley with just one Egyptological student, the other were all from computer science. and digital natives, like really skilled with technologies. But it was really trying to understand which software works better especially when you have to bring the 3D models, so we use Metashape into Unity for the VR app. And so we use Blender, we experimented a lot, and sometimes it lasted like 2 months just to understand one feature that we needed. So it's really the amount of time has been a challenge, like having enough time to really develop a great app, and at the same time make sure that the data are the correct one, presented in the correct way. So definitely the management part of the project is important, I think.
How big is the final file? Is it?
We don't have a final file. What people are going to see today is like it's a prototype, it's a proof of concept. So we need to do the actual development to have the final thing, and metadata and database management for that is going to be a significant challenge, and that's something we're facing.
Right, but we can share them right now. They're in GitHub.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone is interested to test it, we can share the online.
I would like to open up the audience, but questions to the audience. But I just want to throw one thing down, and I know there's no great answer to it now, but I expect it will be picked up by every session, and that is, how do you manage your data richness versus your publication, your actual distribution model? And with photogrammetrically scanned assets, you're talking about a big pipeline that squishes out a little product at the end that you can actually give to people. And having tried to do this project similarly, directly from the field work into the virtual world, and then distribute it, hopefully, to Egypt as well as the rest of the world, you're talking about very small bandwidth that you have to expect people to be able to manage, and it's just a challenge. It's a huge challenge, and I'm not sure that there's any one solution. You just got to make it work as best you can. So that's a comment, not a question. So do we have time for 3? I think we have 3 minutes. Okay, let's get some questions from the audience.
Hi, Francesca.
Thank you so much for a great presentation and conversation. I am really interested in annotation generally and this layering of materials around visually rich data. And design comes into this, right, in a big way. And I noticed you've done annotation differently throughout the sort of different elements of the project, and I wanted to have you speak a little bit to the different approaches you've taken to annotation. In some cases, right, I saw sort of an outlining, which I think allows you to still be able to see the hieroglyphs, which is really important. But personally, on another project I'm working on with the Fullerton Museum, we've had a similar, it looked like in the very early slides, where you've had a highlight of the hieroglyphs, right? And I'm coming back to your early comments of how do you prevent this sort of combating cultural disrespect, right? Where you don't want to mystify something that is not meant to be mystified, and yet these are gaming conventions that people are very well aware, right? Where you highlight something because it just lights up because you mouse over it, right? So how have you as a team thought about those things and thought about annotation, right? Versus a pip, versus a number, which again blocks the hieroglyph. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you navigate
Do you
all
want
of
to
that.
also introduce a little bit about yourself so that we
Sure. Francesca Albrezzi, I'm in the Office of Advanced Research Computing at UCLA, and I've been working with the Fullerton Museum on a Vital Matters initiative, which is a grant-funded project where we've been sort of thinking about how do we have sort of polyfocal documentation around objects that increases different kinds of perspectives and interpretations of objects, and how can we do this in using digital tools? So hence my interest in annotation.
Well, one is we've been experimenting a lot and we haven't really decided what our final design is going to be because we've been playing with different things. And Rita, maybe you can talk about the different things that you've experimented with in terms of the hieroglyphs, because I feel like that's the most obvious.
Yeah, so basically the annotations were connected first to the Book of the Dead in 3D. That was whose main aim was indeed being able to read translations and editions of these coffins online from the 3D model instead than on a book, on a facsimile. And the question was like, okay, how much I can add with the annotations, because even visually can get a bit overwhelming when you have too many windows popping up. So we tried, for the platform of the Book of the Dead in 3D, we made these menu bars with translation, origin, names, vocabulary. I was adding all what students would need to read everything there online. But once we transported the 3D model of the sarcophagus in the tomb for the VR app, actually, I thought that was a bit too much, because if you are in the tomb, you don't just want to spend 1 hour reading and knowing about the sarcophagus. You want to explore the tomb. So I reduced the annotations to just showing, and if you try the app, you will see, showing the hieroglyphs with the translation line by line or column by column. And that's all what we have for now. We were even thinking to have someone, a voice, who would read the text in ancient Egyptian, although we don't know exactly the pronunciation of all the words. So that would be, again, a reconstruction. It would not be real ancient Egyptian, but it will give a more immersive idea of even how this text would sound, because those were magical spells meant to be spoken aloud. It always starts with words to be said. So there was this performative magic of speaking out what the wishes of the deceased. And so, yeah, for now, I think we will stick to that, like fewer annotations, but the ones that we think will make the experience more immersive. While on a separate website, you can have, of course, much more information. And indeed, we have a Sketchfab page as well for the Book of the Dead in 3D, but the limits of Sketchfab is that actually you cannot really add many annotations, and they're not really, I don't think they are easy even to connect to the image, and just so we were trying better ways.
And one of the other things we want to do in the final app, which for those of you that watched the SciArc project videos, that had over on one side of a frame, right, access to historical imagery, ground plans, things like that. That's the type of sort of contextual information that we would also like to have, because it's early 1900s. There is some black and white photography of early Saqqara and the early excavations taking place. So we'd like to include that. We do have, the names and some description of some of the specific Egyptian workmen who were actually the ones excavating the tombs. And so we want to bring them into the story as well. And so we want to provide some other historical information in there within the sort of narrative space. But again, how to integrate that kind of documentary stuff within a VR experience is something that we don't really know yet how to do well. And so we're still looking for examples from other projects and models to follow.
I mean, one of the things that we're thinking about with our Bunker Hill project, because there's just, again, so many layers, so many different artifacts, so many different stories to be told, is giving the user options of being able to kind of toggle, well, I guess not toggle, but like choose, thematize the material, and then say what's the sort of stuff that you would like to see? What are the sort of annotations that you would like to see? That's how we've been.
That makes a huge amount of sense to us. We've thought about, that you could take sort of trajectories through the VR app, through the tour, that you could go on if you're interested in early Egyptology, you could do a tour that sort of focuses on that. If you're interested in funerary cult, you could do a version that's really focused on those elements, and then where you'd actually be able to sort of pick up and handle the objects that are funerary objects within the tomb, to sort of have different paths that you can take through and that would expose you to different types of these kinds of contextual materials based on your interest level, right? And that different people could then do the app in different ways.
And Eric, your project is going to do something similar, right? I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Just sort of offering choices to the user about what kinds.
My question is really after trying out a lot in a classroom, how to learn through VR. How long can someone, a student, be focused with the headset on? So how much you can learn actually, so how much content that will be,
I'd be happy
I don't
to
know
actually put you in touch. I was involved with a grant with the Viterbi School here for engineering, and we got some pretty good grants with VR funding. My practice and my team usually works more with AR, and so one of the biggest challenges is obviously the UI UX question, annotations. But I think beyond that larger discussion is storytelling and gamification of an actual experience. Again, maybe these are more marketing and architectural words, but I think largely speaking, every time we've worked with any cultural partner, Museum of Natural History in Houston, and all these other museums that, at least my practice, like 75% of our clients are museums essentially. So a lot of the storytelling is involving with the curators on how best to educate an 8-year-old to 85-year-old in accessibility of information. So happy to put you in touch offline, obviously not in this discussion, but I think it's about delivering the actual assets to a wider audience that inclusive of accessibility beyond disabilities, and also multiculturalism, I think generally is definitely an issue.
Which I think is also what grant agencies look at, probably, and that we are still a bit weak on.
But it's great that you tested so much of it, right?
We started, yeah.
Trying, yeah.
I have a question that goes back to one of the points that you made at the beginning of the presentation. You said that you were thinking about, some people just can't wear Oculus. That's
Yeah.
And right, and then you just said, the amount of time, like how much does that work? So you said you were thinking about, what happens also if the headsets become obsolete, right? What happens when the technology goes away? And so is there a reason, I'm sure you've thought this through, I was hoping you could share this reason of why you think the sort of 3D model is the way you want to tell the story, right? So many of us, if we looked at the pre-circulated materials, watch the video to begin with, why not the video? 2D?
Well, yeah.
So, what does the 3D get you that the movie experience doesn't?
Well, for all of the grants, we have to do a desktop version anyways, because the headsets they're not common enough. So we always write it as we're basically creating 2 projects. One, which is a desktop version that does all of this and can actually add more additional content that we can link out to, academic publications and the original things, which is great. But Rita and I both just really think, as people who spend time in Egyptian tombs, there's nothing like feeling like you are in a space in Egypt and getting the physical sense of being in a small place or a big place and surrounded by Egyptian texts that are really meant to be, like Rita said, layers of onions of protection around you. And there's nothing like feeling that embodied experience of you being in the center, surrounded by all of that text and color around you. And I just don't think a desktop expresses that. And so we really are interested in trying, especially for US students, most of our students have never been to Egypt, many of them will never go, to give them that sense of scale and space that really immersive 3D allows you to have.
And also in particular for coffins, which are these large objects. Generally, there are coffins in all kind of museums, Egyptian antiquities, because many of those were brought to Europe and to the US, but they are always exhibited behind the glass standing, which is not really how they were in the tomb. Now more modern exhibitions have them lying horizontally. Anyway, in both cases, they cannot be moved. So you cannot have a full vision of these items, which were fully decorated also inside with text and images of gods and invocations. While with the 3D model, you can flip it around, you can open the lid, you can. I choose not to scan human remains, so there are no mummies in my coffin models. But you can see the whole decoration inside and outside. So that's something also that you could not do with the video. It's really something that I like the 3D technology for that. The fact that you move the object in space. And there's this new experience of digitally almost experiencing, touching the object somehow.
State colleges and universities by 2026 are going to be required to have all of their course materials and anything that's on the internet that they make publicly available that's not considered archival, fully accessible to people of all abilities. Have you considered how you're going to deal with people, or not deal, but how you're going to make materials available people who are partially sighted or are completely blind in this context? I mean, I can think of ways that you might be able to do it, but what are some of the ways you're considering doing that?
Yeah, so we've talked in the project about having accessibility features that can be accessed for people with low vision, and that I don't know how that would work for people who are fully blind, but we can do, and there's a number of websites out there that like specifically talk with suggestions for how to deal with 3D for accessibility. So we've been reading through those and trying to follow some of those ideas for both turning on and then also having subtitles for audio for people that have low hearing. So we're trying to think of ways to make it more accessible for people with hearing or low vision. But indeed, it's a big challenge, and I don't know how does anyone use a headset in these ways. So it's a big question for us, and I don't know the answer to that question.
And also, so we have been looking a lot also for grant writing in terms of accessibility, what to do. And there are actually, I know there are also new technologies also for tactile experiences that recreate the image for people who cannot really see directly from the headset. But the problem is also these technologies are very expensive, and so this make them of restricted use. So I think this is a problem that should be addressed by at a higher level, and make possible for you poor Egyptologists like us.
Yeah, we can't answer. The people at Meta need to answer that question.
The problem is really funding. If we would have more fundings and we could really use all the top technologies, that would be great. But in fact, that never happened. So we are always struggling with seed grants and hiring students and having to train students. But then when you apply for a grant, they request accessibility, shareability. Okay, thank you, but make it possible for us to really do it. So I hope things slowly will change, because now there is a lot of awareness indeed about accessibility.
Sean?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about shareability. You mentioned Sketchfab a few minutes ago, and this is a great repository for 3D models, but it's not built for scholarly work or academics. So have you been talking either with the Hearst Museum or with libraries on your campuses about making these 3D models available through their digital collections? And if so, what have those conversations been like? As we're all trying to figure out how to archive and make accessible 3D models.
Yes, so the coffins of my project, most of which are from the Hearst Museum, are also in the database of the museum and accessible through their portal, online portal.
Yeah, and all of my models of the landscape from Saqqara are archived at Stanford University libraries, and those are accessible in chunks for download through them. So, I mean, this is one of our major challenges with publishing 3D, is that you often have to do it in chunks in different places. And so then people come to us and say, oh, we'd really love to have this whole thing. And then you have to do all this labor as a scholar to recreate these things because they can't actually be shared as these big files, right? So this is it is a challenge, and it's going to be one that we're going to face when we actually choose sort of what is our final app going to look like? How do we design those elements with as much shareability as possible that we don't then have to touch later? And that's always, I would say, again, I can't answer that question.
Yeah, but about Sketchfab, I would add that from my experience, students use it more than university repositories. And that's why more and more museums are posting their 3D models on Sketchfab. Many scholars are also art historians. They have their own pages on Sketchfab. It works really well in terms of sharing those more high quality scholarly work mixed with a lot of other kind of work, which is indeed not scholarly, but for some reasons I think it's still really valid as a platform.
I might also be able to answer a little bit of that question. This is, again, a while ago, but I was the Library of Congress's inaugural Digital Klug Fellow. And so a lot of the issues that you're mentioning, the Library of Congress actively has an archival team that's targeting explicitly the issues that you're trying to address.
Good.
I'm very happy to, again, put you in touch if that's something that you're interested in, because I think one of the larger issues is readers that go to Library of Congress, message librarians, and they're like, we want access to these files. And architecturally, there's a lot of files that are in 3D, and the Library of Congress, the reason why I was involved was they didn't know how to really share these files. And so one of the larger open source question is, how do you differentiate open access as a point of contention when it comes to intellectual property assets that really have a really important kind of distribution kind of estates, right? If you're going to IMPA's buildings, it's different to just see the sketch or photography that has a metadata, but once you're into the 3D and you distribute it, it's not really as easy to lend or rent it out without not knowing what the derivative might end up being. So, but that's that. I'm again, they're really great there at the Library of Congress, but also at the Klug Center. So if that's something that you're interested in,
thank you.
Happy to provide.
Oh
that.
yeah, thank you.
As I follow up the chair, let me just emphasize we're probably at the end of this session, and that was very productive and exciting, and I'm sure we can have coffee and do it later too.